Hello, my name is Matthew Quilliam and welcome back to another tutorial video with me, this time about the suspensions that they don't tell you about. In this video I'm going to be using this Duke 10 banjolele. Even though it's banjolele, of course all the technical aspects in the left hand still apply to standard ukuleles. It's tuned G, C, E, A. So let's delve right in. What are these suspensions that they don't tell you about? Who are they? Well, normally when we talk about suspended chords, we're talking about chords that may sound a bit like this. Or even a bit like this when I actually tune the instrument. So what are these chords? Well, when we take a normal chord, for example C, we all know that one, the notes are C, E and G. Now in the musical alphabet, when we form a chord, we play a note, then we skip a note, play a note, skip a note and play a note. So we have C, which we play, then we skip the D and go to an E, skip the F and go to a G. So what we end up playing when we play a C chord is the first, third and fifth notes in the musical alphabet, or the C major scale. Now when a chord is given a quality like major or minor, it is given this name based on the third note. So in C, which is short for C major, we have this E natural. But when we play a very similar chord called C minor, we have an E flat instead, whereas the G and the C remain the same. So we know that the third note of a chord is the chord that gives it a quality, makes it happy or sad, major or minor. So what happens then when we replace this third with something ambiguous? Well, that's where suspended chords come in. And this is where we replace the third with either the second or the fourth degree of the scale instead. Now these degrees of the scale don't have any major or minor quality about them, or at least they don't contribute that quality to this particular chord when we're talking about suspensions. For example, if we replace the E with an F, so all we're doing is just adding, we've got a C and we're adding a little finger there on the first fret of the E string to create a C suspended 4. It's neither major nor minor. Also the F, because it's so close to the E, it really wants to resolve back down to the E, and it's happy to go to either the E or the E flat. Or either one, it doesn't matter, but when you're hearing that F, you don't know perhaps even which one it's going to go to. And so it creates a sense of tension and dissonance because the F is clashing with the G with a minor second. As well as, of course, the chord is ambiguous tonally. And so suspensions create a real nice sense of tension and anticipation of a more consonant chord. The same applies to suspended 2 chords. We're replacing the E with the D below. So when we have a suspended chord, we'll write the name of the chord, or what it was, or what it's going to be, and then either just the little word sus, short for suspension, and if you see sus on its own, it normally implies that it's a suspended 4th chord, because that's the most common type of suspended chord for reasons we'll come to in just a minute. However, sometimes some people will put in the 4 just to be nice. If you see a 2, then obviously that means suspended 2. And suspended 4 means you raise the third note by 1 degree of the musical scale, and if you see a sus2, you lower it by 1 degree. So let's say we're in the key of F. Let's turn it into a sus4, where we want to be replacing these 2 A notes with B flats. So therefore we play a shape that looks like this. What about this G? Let's turn it into a sus2. Well, let's move the B back to the A. Now, if you know anything about suspensions, this is probably the furthest you've come in your suspension education. And this is what I mean by the suspensions that people don't tell you about. You see, there are more than just these two types of suspension that we normally get taught. It's just that these two types are the most common in popular music. The system that we name chords by today was developed by people in the early recording era who, session musicians especially, might not have even had a day's notice to know the chords before they had to record it on an old system that didn't allow for retakes. So the system had to be very short and concise and very accurate, and you should be able to understand it just from a glance. And so we use these shorthand ways to describe suspensions, and they're pretty easy to get to when combined with other chords and things. However, there are lots of different other types of dissonance and suspensions, so I'm going to get into those right now. So first of all, we have to actually look at a bit more detail about what a suspension is. As I discussed before, a suspension not only exists on its own, but it also has a desire to go somewhere. Let's return to the sus4 over a C there. We have the suspension itself, and then we have the resolution, where the suspension drops down by a degree. Now, the resolving down part is very important. Typically, dissonances resolve downwards. A similar dissonance called the seventh dissonance, when we play a 7 chord. This is our B flat, our dissonant note, and when we resolve it by going to an F chord, it's fallen, it's gone down, resolved down by a step to the A. And you'll see this with every single standard position chord where there's a 7. In G7, the 7 is the F, and it resolves down when you go to a C chord. F7, the E flat goes down to the D. It's very satisfying for dissonances to resolve downwards. And with the C suspended 4, with this F, it's possible for the F to resolve downwards to the E to create our nice resolution on a C chord. But then we come to sus2 chords. Now this D needs to resolve to an E, but that resolves going up. Now there's actually a debate about whether suspended 2 chords even exist in the first place. Some people argue that it's just an inversion of another sus4 chord. I mean, if you take this position, this is actually also how you would play a G sus4 chord. You've got a G chord, and you raise the B to a C. 0, 2, 3, 3. It's exactly the same as how you play a C sus2. And because the G sus4 will mean that the suspension resolves downwards, some people argue that this inversion of the chord has more credit than it's calling it a C sus2. I'm not here to provide my own opinions. In fact, I don't really have one, because the thing I enjoy the most about music theory isn't actually finding an answer, but it's the debate amongst lots of different controversial topics. But it's worth noting that dissonances and especially suspensions usually resolve downwards, and therefore the suspended 2 chord does lose a little bit of credit. So let's think about how we could instead resolve this D downwards. Have it go down to the C. Well, there is another problem actually. Suspensions are designed to work above the bass note. This is where the numbers actually come in, because with the sus4 we have C, D, E, F. So our bass note is C, and then the 4th degree of the scale above the bass note is the suspension. Likewise, with the sus2 chords, whether you believe in them or not, that's the 2nd degree of the scale, C, D. But the thing is, if you actually change the bass note, you change the suspension, and then it doesn't become a suspension anymore. A suspension can't be suspended over itself. There has to be a constant bass note that remains the same throughout the chord, which means that this can't be a 2-to-1 suspension, i.e. going from the 2nd degree down to the 1st, because the bass note is changing. Therefore, while this is a chord, this is a valid chord progression, you can't describe it as a suspension. However, if you wanted the note D to resolve to the C, you could put it the octave up and create a 9/8 suspension. So the suspended 9 chord looks a bit like this, and then the C chord to resolve. Now this works because the D and the C are an octave up, so you still have this constant bass note, this C, that doesn't change, but yet you still have the D that goes down to C. And we call it a 9/8 because it's 9 degrees above the bass note. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. We've gone above the octave and coming back to the octave. And 9/8 suspensions are really great for this kind of thing. You can also suspend other notes within the chord as well. For example, the 5th. Now let's find the 5th of our C chord. It's the G, and let's raise it. Oh, that's just another version of A minor. So even though that's acting a bit like a suspension, where we're going from the 6th degree to the 5th, it's just going from A minor to C. And to be honest, the interval of a 6th is more desirable sometimes than the interval of a 5th. So they sort of work as a suspension like that, but you'd be hard-pressed to actually call it a dissonant suspension. Suspensions, after all, are supposed to create tension, but an A minor chord is not very tense at all. We can invert a chord and put a different note in the bass. So let's take this C shape, which is like our B flat, but moved up 2. We now have an E in the bass, and then a G, and then a C on top. Still a C chord, but now it's a C first inversion, or a C over E, because we've got the E in the bass. Now let's do that same thing again, where we have the F replace the E. Well, you'll notice that, again, this is falling into the same problem that we found earlier with 2/1 suspensions. This is actually another 2/1. Even though the chord is still a C chord, because we've changed the bass note, the bass note now is changing from E to F. So, whereas before the F to the E drop was acceptable because C was in the bass, having this new bass note of E being replaced altogether by the F, again, you can't really call that a suspension. Interestingly, if we do what was previously a 9/8 suspension, we have this high D going down to a C, this suspension is called a 7/6 suspension. That's because from the E all the way back up to the octave of the C, E, F, G, A, B, C, and then of course we go up one more for the suspended note of the D, you get a 7/6 suspension. Something like that is really nice to play. Another 7/6 suspension comes when we play a C chord like this. It's a bit like our normal G chord, but we're sliding all the way up so the pair of fingers is on the 7th fret. This time we have G in the bass, so this is a C over G, or a C second inversion. And we can change this E on the top, and we can play it as an F, and this is another 7/6 suspension, where we have this C note that is temporarily suspended by the D. So far we've just been working with the chord of C major, but you can also apply all the same principles to minor chords as well. So you can have a C sus4 resolve to C minor, or let's have this C minor shape up here and do a similar thing like this with something like a 6/5 suspension. Although that's just an A flat chord going to a C minor, but we could also have the D to the C, something like that. That's actually a 7/5, that's actually a 7/6 suspension, because in this particular voicing the bass note is an E flat, and then you've got the D, which is a seventh above the E flat, resolving down to a C. And of course you can do these in lots of keys as well. So why don't you go and try out all these new types of suspensions? You've probably not heard of many of them because there's so many, and a lot of music doesn't like to really divulge much into lots of these other suspensions. A lot of the chords that resemble these suspensions actually get called something else because, as I said earlier, the system of chords we use is designed to be as simple as possible, and often the shortest name of a chord is given to a chord. Like we said how a C suspended 6-5 is really just an A minor chord, well, they're both equally valid names for this A minor chord, C suspended 6 and A minor, but of course A minor is always going to get put because it's a lot easier to just write AM than C sus 6 and then potentially even with the resolution back to a C. The final type of suspension I want to talk about is something called a double suspension, where you play two suspended notes at once. One of my favourites is a 4-3-9-8 suspension. So we take our C chord, let's suspend the third up to the fourth, and let's suspend our 8 up to a ninth. And then you get something that looks like this. I'll take my finger off because I don't need that one. That's the actual shape of the suspension, but I find it easier to already have that C chord bassist already there, so the ring finger doesn't actually come off. So then when I go to C, I get two suspensions at once. You can also have double suspensions where the suspensions do move in opposite directions. If you claim that the C suspended 2 is a valid suspension and that the D can resolve upwards, then you can play both the C sus4 and the C sus2 shape at once. And therefore the F goes down to an E while the D goes up to the E. The suspensions don't even have to happen at the same time in sync. You can have this, if we go back to the 4-3-9-8 suspension, you can resolve one of them first and then the other. Something like that. And of course there are infinite combinations, and you could even have triple suspensions and things like that. And I'm actually still in a bit of a process of working out just how many suspensions you can get away with before you sort of run out and end up just writing new chords. You can of course also not resolve a suspension, which leaves the listener in suspense. You can deliberately manipulate suspensions in order to create tension. So go ahead and try suspending just any note of the chord. Take a random chord and raise it by a step and see what happens. Try and resolve it down. I'd love to know how you get on, so please do leave a comment in the comments section below, as well as leaving a like on this video and subscribe to this channel if you're not already. I upload lots of content like these tutorial videos specifically for ukulele, and I also upload performance videos as well. If you'd like to leave a tip to support musicians like me who haven't had any gigs for a good while because of this coronavirus thing, then please do visit my PayPal link, which you can find in the description below. Finally, head on over to my Facebook page and my website where you can catch all the latest news about me and where I'll be performing. Thank you very much for watching. Take care. Bye.